Thank you very much for being with us. A Russian aircraft has been shot down by a Syrian air defense missile. Moscow blames Israel for this fatal incident. Russian officials say Israeli pilots used the Russian aircraft as cover, and by taking up such a position, they put the Ilyushin-20 in the line of fire from Syrian positions. Expressing sorrow at the death of the 15 Russian crew, Israel says it was targeting Syrian military facilities that are used to transfer weapons to Hezbollah in Lebanon. Here at France24, Catherine Viette with this.
Finger pointing all around after a Russian reconnaissance plane is shot down in Syria. Moscow blames Israel for the accident, accusing officials of providing insufficient warning.
We view Israel's provocative actions as hostile. Following the irresponsible actions of the Israeli military, 15 Russian soldiers were killed. This is absolutely not in keeping with the spirit of the Russian-Israeli partnership. We reserve the right to an adequate response.
The Russian plane was shot down by Syrian missiles over the Mediterranean Sea, not far from its airbase. The missiles were reportedly targeting Israeli fighter jets in the area, who were carrying out an attack on Syrian military facilities in Latakia. Israel has confirmed it targeted facilities that are used to transfer weapons to Hezbollah in Lebanon, but officials have squarely placed the blame on Syria.
Israel expresses sorrow for the death of the aircrew members of the Russian plane that was down tonight due to Syrian anti-aircraft fire. Israel holds the Assad regime, whose military shot down the Russian plane, fully responsible for this incident.
Israeli officials say the Syrian military failed to ensure no Russian planes were in the air, and that its anti-aircraft missiles were inaccurate and extensive. Israel's deputy ambassador was summoned to Russia's foreign ministry. Seeking to defuse tensions, Russian President Vladimir Putin said the shooting down of its plane was the result of a chain of tragic accidental circumstances, and that Moscow needs to investigate the incident further.
Have they avoided the worst or simply delayed the inevitable? 10 days after airing their differences publicly, Vladimir Putin and Recep Tayyip Erdogan agreeing to a buffer zone deal around Syria's last major rebel stronghold. Has Idlib and its nearly 3 million citizens been spared? Or will the deal, which includes joint patrols by the Russians and the Turks, unravel? What is the endgame for Idlib and its 50,000 estimated armed insurgents, which include Sunni radicals of various stripes? Turkey has often backed many of those radicals. Last month, though, for the first time, it put the al-Qaeda-affiliated successor to the al-Nusra Front on a terror watch list. Is Ankara taking a new tack as it faces the prospect of another mass wave of refugees on its borders? Syria always seems to be one wrong move away from a turn for the even worse. Take, for instance, Monday's disappearance of a Russian military transport plane off the coast. We'll see why the downing of that reconnaissance aircraft concerns not only Damascus and the rebels, but also Israel, France, the United States. A reminder that any incident in Syria these days carries with it a domino effect. Today in the France24 Debate, we're looking at what's the deal to avoid the worst. With us, Syrian activist Yahya al-Abdullah. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me again on this show. I'm delighted to be here.
We also are pleased to welcome back General Dominique Trinquant, former head of the French military mission to the United Nations, former head of UN forces in Lebanon as well. Joining us from Istanbul, Yusuf Erim, commentator for TRT World Television. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
And from Oklahoma City, his Syria Comment blog, a must-read, Joshua Landis, director of the Center for Middle East Studies at the University of Oklahoma. How are you?
Pleasure to be with you.
The France24 Debate on Facebook and Twitter, hashtag F24Debate. Let's start with the latest. Russia's president speaking on the phone with Israel's prime minister, telling Benjamin Netanyahu that he'd violated Syrian airspace, but Vladimir Putin, moreover, blaming a chain of, quote, tragic circumstances for the shooting down of that Ilyushin-20 reconnaissance aircraft by a Syrian missile. The Israeli military expressing for its part sorrow for the 15 killed. Catherine Viet has the story.
Finger pointing all around after a Russian reconnaissance plane is shot down in Syria. Moscow blames Israel for the accident, accusing officials of providing insufficient warning.
We view Israel's provocative actions as hostile. Following the irresponsible actions of the Israeli military, 15 Russian soldiers were killed. This is absolutely not in keeping with the spirit of the Russian-Israeli partnership. We reserve the right to an adequate response.
The Russian plane was shot down by Syrian missiles over the Mediterranean Sea, not far from its airbase. The missiles were reportedly targeting Israeli fighter jets in the area, who were carrying out an attack on Syrian military facilities in Latakia. Israel has confirmed it targeted facilities that are used to transfer weapons to Hezbollah in Lebanon, but officials have squarely placed the blame on Syria.
Israel expresses sorrow for the death of the aircrew members of the Russian plane that was down tonight due to Syrian anti-aircraft fire. Israel holds the Assad regime, whose military shot down the Russian plane, fully responsible for this incident.
Israeli officials say the Syrian military failed to ensure no Russian planes were in the air and that its anti-aircraft missiles were inaccurate and extensive. Israel's deputy ambassador was summoned to Russia's foreign ministry. Seeking to defuse tensions, Russian President Vladimir Putin said the shooting down of its plane was the result of a chain of tragic accidental circumstances and that Moscow needs to investigate the incident further.
General Trinquant, let me ask you, when I woke up this morning, there was talk of accusations that the French had somehow done this because there's that frigate that we saw, which is nearby. Then it was finger-pointing at Israel. Then we heard the comments being toned down. What do you make of what happened?
Of course, a Russian plane is fired at, and then the Russian will not don't want to accuse their allied, the Syrians. So first they accuse the French, then the Israeli, and finally they are obliged to recognize that it was the Syrian missiles who shot down the aircraft. So in this area, you've got a lot of people. And a lot of people are not doing the same thing. And of course, when Israel is striking in Syria, they are not warning the Israeli, neither the Russians. So that's probably why there was this mistake, because they were striking at the same time when this reconnaissance aircraft was probably very close. And so it was a mistake from the Syrian air defense.
So the Russians say they didn't get enough advance warning from the Israelis. It took place not far from where the Russians themselves have an air base.
Yes, of course, and that's probably why the air defense is so important in this area. And of course, there is a problem because we know that the Russian and the Israeli are talking to each other very often, and so it's an embarrassment for the Russian. But for the Israeli, of course, they are striking because they've got targets, mainly Iranian targets, to destroy in Syria, and so 1 minute warning for them it's enough, and probably the reconnaissance aircraft, the Russian reconnaissance aircraft, was late before landing or in the zone where it shouldn't have been.
When you say 1 minute is a warning, you mean if they had all you need is a 60-second warning, is what you're saying? No,
you need more than that. You need more than that. Depends on the altitude and the speed of the aircraft and the location, exactly the location. When the Israeli are planning their strike, they are planning their strike without looking at what's happening currently, and the reconnaissance aircraft is not an enemy for them. It's just they are just doing reconnaissance with electronic system, but they are not able to fight against the fighter. So that's why it was not so important for the Israeli. But in fact, the real mistake was made by the Syrian. We are not able to make the difference between Israeli fighter and a reconnaissance aircraft, which is is a major failure in the system.
Is the Russian claim that the Israelis, the initial claim that the Israelis may have used the Russian aircraft as a cover, a valid one?
No, I don't think they need that. They don't need that. I mean, they've got sufficient system to strike. They are striking not very often, but they are striking often, and never they had a fighter destroyed in Syria.
Joshua Landis, the incident that took place, are you surprised that it doesn't happen more often when you see how many parties are in the area, how crowded Syria's airspace is, and when you see how many various players are there?
You're absolutely right. We've got a lot of belligerents in a very, very small area, and we saw a Russian jet shot down by the Turks for going perhaps a kilometer or two into Turkish territory. We've seen Israeli drones shot down. There have been Syrian planes shot down. There have been a number of things shot at and shot down because there are so many different belligerents. The United States Air Force is flying in there, Russia, Israel. Iran has emplacements that the Israelis are trying to destroy. So it's a very crowded battlefield. And in fact, it is surprising that this hasn't happened more often, because we know that the equipment of the Syrians and other actors is not that good. And trying to distinguish between all these different belligerents is a very tough task.
Will there be repercussions from this?
I don't think so. Obviously, there are going to be some very upset Russians. That's going to take a toll on the relationship between Syria and Russia. And Putin, as you said, is trying to smooth that over already. But there are going to be some very angry people on the ground there in Syria.
Yeah, hang on, you're saying it's going to strain the relationship between Russia and Syria, not Russia and Israel?
Well, I'm sure it'll take a price on Israel too. But at the end of the day, it's Syria that has shot down a Russian airplane. And of course, they can blame it on Israel, and Israel takes part of the blame because Israel's out there doing what it says it's going to do, which is shoot up any area it thinks the Iranians are emplaced in. Over 100 and something Iranians have been killed in the last 2 months in Syria because Israel is hunting down Iranians in Syria and trying to kill them in order to drive them out. That's its stated goal of Netanyahu and the Israeli generals, which is to remove Iran from Syria. And that's America's stated goal as well. So they're hunting Iranians. And of course, Syria doesn't like that. Syria's going to try to stop that as best they can because it's creating a lot of resentment between Iran and Russia, because Iran expects Russia to protect the Iranians there, and Russia's not doing it. And so Syria has to step up and do it, and things go wrong because Syria doesn't have very good anti-aircraft defenses.
Yusuf Erim, you agree?
Well, we have to remember that the Iranians are invited into Syria by the Assad regime first. Secondly, if Putin and the Russian Foreign Ministry called in the Israeli ambassador for an explanation, you can bet that they're holding them responsible to a certain degree, regardless of it's a Syrian anti-aircraft missile that shot him down. Now, looking at the Russians, they're a nationalistic bunch, so I can't see the Russians letting this one go that easily. Maybe on the surface they might let it slide, but they lost 14, 15 servicemen, and that's definitely going to hit a chord with the Russian people, and they'll find a way. They'll find a way to exact some type of, if not revenge, exact some type of toll for this from Israel, whether it be through deteriorating ties or something else in the future.
General Trinquant?
Well, I think the relation between Israel and the Russian are very strong. So the fact that they are asking the ambassador to come, it's a normal procedure. And of course, but I think the anger will be really against the Syrian. The Syrian are equipped and trained by the Russian in air defense system. So probably there will be some sort of thing with the unit who is using the missiles and the radar. Yeah. And but the problem will be they will show a problem with Israel, but in fact they will focus on the problem on the ground with the Syrian.
I don't think that there will be any serious impact on the Russia-Syria relationship after this incident, because basically from the reactions from the Russian authorities, first of all blaming the Israelis, then when it came like the options were over and the only one who did it clearly was the Syrian army, the tone was completely different. Like there was no anger there at all. There might be some internal punishment of the unit, as the general just mentioned, but I don't think there will be like any serious change between the relationship between the Russians and the Syrians. It's not the time, I think, for any big change.
And this is what's confusing for people who don't follow Syria very closely, because they see countries who are on opposite sides when it comes to what to do about Bashar al-Assad, who otherwise have good relations, so your rivals are not necessarily your enemies, your friends are not necessarily your friends. It's super confusing.
It sounds, or it might look super confusing, but I think we need to look at it from a different perspective, using the economic lens here.
The economic lens.
Exactly. If we look at just the deal, and I think I am not in a place to do military analysis at all. I am a social scientist, researcher, and like a student, so I don't really find myself to explain the military aspect to it. But when it comes to the economy, for example, Turkey has been developing a very good relationship, diplomatic and economic, with Russia. And let's not forget that Russia is building the first nuclear reactor for Turkey right now. So this is a lot of money included there. And if we look at the Turkish economy at the moment, and what is the Turkish lira is doing, we find that the deal between the Russians and the Turk quite plausible, and it is the only logical thing that tell us, like, okay, like now we know that Russia and Turkey are not the best friends. However, they have been developing some sort of good relationship on the other side.
Yusuf Erim, it's so hard for people who don't follow this closely, again, to understand, and the way it's been described by Yahya al-Abdullah, because you have a national security risk on the Turkish border. You have the standoff with Turkey and Russia being on opposite sides of the Syria conflict, diametrically opposite sides. And yet, as been described elsewhere, all these common interests. Does public opinion make that distinction between what's going on in Syria and all the rest?
Well, it is important because there's national interest, then there's interests beyond your borders. Obviously, there's national security on the Turkish border. That's very important for Turkey. There's the YPG threat. Now, America, which has normally been a very close ally to Turkey, has kind of on the opposite side right now when it comes to Syria, supporting the YPG and the SDF. Russia, which is normally a rival, is now helping you with the peace process in Syria with the Sochi agreement on Idlib. We also look at Russia. You have the S-400 deal, which is very important. You have the Turk Stream deal, which is a very important energy security deal, which energy security is part of your national security. We look at Iran. Iran is a country that is normally also a rival of Turkey, but now you have Turkey working with Iran in the Astana process. You have Turkey agreeing to help Iran after sanctions, where they've pledged that they're going to continue doing business. So things get very, very complex when you come to this global platform where there's a lot of foreign actors. Syria is a very complex conflict, and there's a lot of national interests that intersect, converge, diverge. So yes, it is very, very complicated, and public opinion, at least an educated public opinion, can separate the difference.
Yeah, and as the public opinion, as the situation in Syria now, where you have all of the armed groups, most of them at least, concentrated in this one rebel-held area now in Idlib, where there's what some are describing it as an endgame. When we come back, we're going to look at that deal on Monday between the Russians and the Turks and see whether or not it can stick. You're watching the France 24 Debate. Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's the France24 Debate, and we're looking at Monday's deal in Sochi that may have averted, at least for now, a huge humanitarian crisis and mass bloodshed in the last rebel-held province of Syria. We're talking about Idlib, in the company of Syrian activist Yahya al-Abdullah, General Dominique Trinquant, former head of the French mission to the United Nations. Welcome back as well to Yusuf Erim, who joins us from Istanbul, from TRT World Television, and from the University of Oklahoma, Joshua Landis, who is with us as well. Welcome back to all of you. Now, after we saw 11 days ago in Tehran, testy exchanges between Vladimir Putin and Recep Tayyip Erdogan, expectations low heading into that one-on-one meeting in Sochi on Monday. That was before they came out with a deal that will see the Turks and the Russians patrol a buffer zone around Idlib by October the 14th.
For this purpose, Russia and Turkey are going to undertake coordinated patrols on both borders of the demilitarized zone that will be determined. Turkey will strengthen the observation points that are already in the Idlib de-escalation zone. I believe that with this agreement, we have prevented a great humanitarian crisis in Idlib.
Lots of reactions, by the way, on the hashtag F24Debate. One from Eduardo saying, for Russia, the agreement is an opportunity to lure Turkey, which boasts NATO's second largest military, closer to its side at a time when relations between Ankara and Washington are at a historic low, something that we mentioned in part one of our discussion. Is it also, Joshua Landis, a case of Russia, which from the outside seems like almighty these days, perhaps being sober about its limitations in Syria?
It's true. Russia's paying a price, but Russia gains a lot out of this. In fact, every side gains something except for the more jihadist groups. And the hot potato is really in their hands right now because they're the ones who have to withdraw and disarm in this military zone. They're the biggest losers. But Russia gains because it shows that they're willing to work with the international community. They're sensitive to human rights and this the outcry that this could be a terrible humanitarian disaster. But at the same time, they're getting 20 kilometers in a long strip of land that goes around a very teeny province. This is a small province with a big population in it. And some of the most hard-bitten jihadist groups are in that little band. So they've got to move back from Latakia and other sensitive places. It's going to be very hard for Turkey to get them to do that. And that's going to be the first big test. Can Turkey really get these al-Qaeda-related groups, get also the Uyghurs from China and the Chechens from Russia, who are placed at the border area around Latakia, to withdraw? And if they can do that, that's a big, they've gotten 20 extra kilometers that they don't have to fight for down in the future. So for Russia, this is a gain, I think, both on the public, arena and in terms of the actual military strategy.
And what is the agreement? What does the agreement actually state when it comes to the disarming of those radical rebel groups?
Well, the 15 to 20 kilometer zone that's going to skirt this entire province is going to, all of the rebels must disarm from their heavy weapons. The radical rebels, jihadists, have to get out. And Russian and Turkish military are going to police this demilitarized zone.
But get out where? It's the last rebel-held zone. To go where?
They have to go inland into the middle of the province more. And we don't know what's going to ultimately happen to this province. This is an interim agreement because Syria and Russia, but primarily Syria, have promised, Assad has promised he's going to take back every inch of Syria. And he believes that that's going to happen at the end of whatever comes down the line. This is really an interim thing. It's not saying we're setting up a Turkish province under the control of Turkey forever. with this demilitarized zone. This is a stopgap measure, and it's going to require a new agreement after a certain amount of time, and we don't really know how much.
And we don't know how much. Let's listen to Vladimir Putin. On Monday, he issued a loud reminder that the insurgency in Idlib includes, as Joshua Landis was mentioning, hardline radicals.
During the meeting, we took a close look at the situation and decided to create a demilitarized zone along the contact line of Syrian government forces and armed opposition, 15 to 20 kilometers deep by the 15th of October. Radically minded rebels to be pulled out of this zone, including the Al-Nusra Front.
Pulling them out of that zone. Yusuf Erim, how is that going to go? It seems as though he's throwing the onus on Turkey to disarm those hardline radicals.
Turkey does have a big responsibility when it comes to disarming the hardline radicals, and they're best situated to do this. Now, they've been in Idlib for a while. They know the terrain. They also have many moderate groups that are close to them that they can work with to help disarm these radical groups, most namely the HTS, the former al-Qaeda affiliate, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham. That's the group that's causing the most problems. Turkey has tried to reach out to them and tried to have them disband in the past and maybe assimilate them into other more moderate groups. However, they haven't gotten the response they've wanted. Now, it's very, very important for Turkey to be able to disband this group because HTS is actually a group that can derail this agreement. So there is a lot of responsibility on Turkey, but they're going to be working very, very hard to try to disband this group. If they don't disband peacefully, maybe other options might be used in the future to neutralize this group.
Are you saying that the Turks...
Are
you saying Turkish forces will be firing at the former al-Qaeda affiliated group?
I'm not saying Turkish forces will be firing. First thing, I highly doubt Turkish forces would engage them if it got to that level. But if it got to that level, maybe the National Liberation Front or one of the more moderate groups that have been trained and prepared. Now, we also have to remember there's a lot of grumblings inside HTS right now. There is a group of HTS that wants to leave, that wants to join the more moderate groups, and there's a group that's trying to stop them from doing that. So these are very important counterterrorism tactics, divide and conquer. So we're going to have to see how strong HTS is, how strong their unity is. We're going to have to see how effective Turkey can be in wooing the less radical groups inside HTS. This is going to be a process, not something that's going to happen in one day.
General Tranko.
Yeah, I think what is very interesting is that it's the last act of the fight against these different bands of jihadists in Syria. The Russian in Aleppo and in Ghouta were able to fight and to negotiate the exit of this group to go somewhere else. The somewhere else was Idlib. Now there is no somewhere else to go. So the discussion is the Turk. The Turk from the start tried to do two things. First, to protect their border. Secondly, to destroy the radical HTS inside Idlib with the help of other parties. So they provide weapons, money and all that inside. Now the discussion in Sochi was such that with this band of 20 kilometers, why 20 kilometers? Because that's the range of mortars. And so the Muslim party inside the pockets will not be able to use mortar outside. And probably the Turk will help some of the party inside to disarm or to have them going, HTS changing from one side to another, but at the end, the strongest fighters are inside the pocket because they have been living from Ghouta and Aleppo. So it will take time. They will reduce the force inside, and then they will attack by a way or the other using aircraft or something else. And the problem
who will do the attacking?
The Syrian with the Russian. But the problem is...
And do you see the Turks standing idle when this happens?
I mean, they want also to destroy HTS, the Turk too, but they don't want to have refugees coming in their country. So that's why they've got to disarm the most part of HTS and then reduce the last part in the pocket.
Yeah, actually, thank you very much. I'd like to go back to the public opinion here and the Turkish public opinion, because this is one of the major issues that are at stake here. In Turkey, the guest welcoming or guest policy has finished long time ago in relation to the Syrian refugees, and to some scholars it has entered the phase of Syrians being enemies as well. I would like to say that Turkey does not really want to have any wave of refugees coming, because it has
they've already had what, nearly 3 million?
More than 3 million. This is the official number, 3 million, but they're definitely more than 3 million. This is number one. So number two, the missing point in this debate, sorry to say that, is the people of Idlib, or the people who ended up in Idlib recently.
Because let me just remind our viewers, Idlib, before the civil war began, 900,000 inhabitants.
Yeah.
And now 2.9 million, they believe, is the estimate.
More than 3 million.
More than 3 million, you're saying.
Yes, more than 3 million for sure. So those people, as we see in the footage just right there, they made their decision when the Russia and the Syrian regime started their military campaign, and we see them for 3 weeks taking to the streets and demonstrating and showing what they really want. And those are the people, the inhabitants, the civilians. And we are talking about more than 3 million, and we are talking about 50,000 military militias, like armed groups, call them what you want. So the number of civilians who made their decision and they wanted to continue what they started is huge. And we have to mention something very important. Those guys who are protesting are fighting HTS, and HTS has been shooting at them the last last Friday. So the thing here, what we really need to pay attention is what really people want and what they are doing. And they are going, I believe, to play a central role in disarming many of the militias.
And then what? And then what?
And then
what's the end game for Idlib?
I think what...
Yes, I think then what? Then we really need to sit down on the table for political negotiation, because those guys have political demands. And they made it super clear that they don't want to be part of the Syrian regime. So we can talk about some political solutions. We don't need to just imagine that bloodshed and bloodbath and bath and the other terms that have been used for Turkey and specifically Turkey, because Turkey does not want this to happen whatsoever.
To interject.
Yusuf Erim.
What Yahya was saying was very important. The civilians of Idlib, when the day or two of peace in between the bombing and the Tehran Declaration, the Sochi Deal, we saw the civilians hit the streets. Now, these weren't terrorists. These were secular civilians. These were conservative civilians. These were many moderate opposition groups all mixed together. These were the people before the Syrian conflict, before the Syrian civil war. There was the Syrian revolution. This was the Syrian revolution. That's what we saw on the streets in Idlib. And this is what Turkey has been trying to protect in Idlib, in the Euphrates Shield, in Afrin. So they have played a very important role. I also want to add one more thing about the Sochi deal. We were talking about what Putin wanted, what Putin's thinking. I think one of the most important things for Putin with the Sochi deal is he's interested in getting to the political solution process, in rebuilding Syria. He wants to look past Idlib now. And to rebuild Syria, to be able to prop up Assad, Assad needs to be able to show that he can rebuild Syria. And to rebuild Syria, Putin needs to be able to secure money. So the EU here plays a very, very important role. And for the EU, the major concern in Idlib has always been migrant flows. So I think this deal with Erdogan was very important in showing the EU also Putin's intentions, that he's willing to help stem migrant flows, and the EU sees Erdogan's solution as the most viable solution, so Putin was willing to play along. It's no coincidence that 2 weeks from now, Russia, Turkey, France, and Germany will be meeting in Istanbul for a summit. And I have a very strong feeling at that summit, the main agenda will be financing for the rebuilding of Idlib.
Joshua Landis, you agree?
You know, the International Crisis Group put out a report saying that this should be used as a major leverage, that European statesmen had said that they will certainly not help with the reconstruction of Syria. The problem with this is that Europe has said it will not help with the reconstruction of Syria as long as Assad is president. The United States has been pushing that line very hard. The United States has also said it will not allow international organizations like the UN, World Bank, IMF, so forth, to help with the reconstruction as long as Assad is president. So it is going to be extremely difficult for the Europeans to provide any real money for reconstruction in Syria, as long as the Americans are totally opposed to it, and the French are quite opposed to it as well. They want to see Assad gone, and we saw the America in the last month really recommit itself to regime change in Syria through a UN process, the Geneva process, which it says it's going to hold elections in Damascus. And to do that, the America has committed itself to stay in the 30% of Syria that it dominates in the north. And that part of Syria has most of its oil, most of its water, most of its good agriculture. So the United States can beggar Syria by withholding this money. And it believes that this is leverage in order to force the Russians to allow UN people to come in, hold elections, get rid of Assad. I don't think it's realistic, but that's the stated goal of America.
Joshua Landis,
get Iran out, weaken Assad.
Joshua Landis, in previous shows, you have said that the United States can make sure that Russia gets bogged down in Syria. If the scenario you just describes unfolds, will it then be the United States that's also bogged down in Syria?
Well, yes, but the United States believes that its bog is much smaller because there's only 2,000 American special forces in the north of Syria spending very little money. And by doing that, they can ruin this for Iran and Russia, you see, because then Iran and Russia do not get to taste the fruits of their success. They've won in Syria, and they're planning to keep Assad as president. And they're not going to, you know, America's going to make it as hard as possible. Bolton, National Security Advisor, just said that this was the goal, to turn Syria into a quagmire for Russia and Iran, to punish them, with the hope of eventually driving them out of Syria.
General Trinquant?
What's interesting, we are talking about political deal and future of Syria without Assad. What is interesting is that neither in Tehran nor in Sochi, Assad was part of the deal. He was not there. So, in fact, the Turkey and Russia are talking about the future of Syria.
It's good to remind it because we sometimes forget it.
Yeah, exactly. And Assad wants to take back Idlib, but he can't do it alone. So he needs everyone for him. And if he is not able to take Idlib, at the end, people will force him to a negotiation because he will not be able to do something else.
I even remember saying on this very show that Assad is not a main player in this game. He is not the deal maker. He is not like the one leading the leader of the Syrian state for a very long time. I just want to come back to Mr. Youssef Eren when he said the Turks have been protecting the Syrian revolution, and I think we are. I totally disagree here. And I would like to bring something else that has not been talked about in this Russia-Turkey deal, which is the Kurds. Why aren't we talking about the huge piece of land described by Mr. Joshua Landis as the richest part left in Syria?
I was hoping that you'd open that topic up.
So we are not really addressing the big elephant in the room.
Well, let's address it. How do you see it? How do you see it now?
Turkey has the interest to make friends with Russia. And as I mentioned earlier, this has been a process, ongoing process for a very long time. And like Russia does not really want the Kurds to be the main power
so to get them to direct the guns of the insurgents at that area that's where the U.S. military advisors are operating?
This could be an ugly scenario that we might see in Idlib, especially with very specific change in the ground just after yesterday, after the signing of the agreement. One group took over like a border village that was controlled by another militia, and HTS took over, and now they are kind of getting closer to where the Kurds are. So we might see really an ugly scenario by pushing HTS and other extremist groups as close as to the Kurds. And I don't think we should just ignore the fact that the Kurds are taking a big space, and they are not mentioned at all.
HTS, which used to be the Al-Nusra Front.
Exactly.
It was only placed last month, Yusuf Aram, on a terror watch list by Turkey. Why did it happen so late?
Honestly, I don't know why it happened so late. It was a political decision, I guess. Turkey had been trying to disband them for a very, very long time. They were unsuccessful. This is something that Putin and Iran wanted, and Erdogan agreed to their demands and placed them on the terror watch list. And now they're working very, very hard to continue to disband them. But I would also like to talk about the Kurds, and I don't want to use the word the Kurds. I want to use the word the YPG, because this is not the Kurds. This is the YPG that's going to be dealt with soon. I want to talk about the next narrative. Now that Idlib is slowly closing out, or at least there's a temporary solution in Idlib, I think the very important next narrative is going to be east of the Euphrates. We saw at the Tehran declaration, we saw Erdogan hint about this, where he talked about the danger east of the Euphrates. We saw Rouhani talk about east of the Euphrates. We saw Turkey launch Operation Olive Branch. Iran has launched operations against Kurdish militia groups in Iraq lately. They've increased their operations in Iraq. They've also increased their operations domestically against the YPG's Iranian arm, Pejak. So American presence east of the Euphrates is something that also irritates Russia as well. So the next time the Astana group meets together, we can probably expect the east of the Euphrates to become the main narrative for them. And we can most likely expect them all to agree on American presence, and especially YPG presence in that area, being a direct threat to Syrian territorial integrity. So this is going to be a big problem. Joshua was talking about America trying to play as a spoiler. Joshua, I don't think this is a game. I think America should take this very, very seriously, because there's a bloc forming against them in Syria. I see the regime being able to get on board. Iran has serious troops on the ground. The regime has serious troops on the ground. Turkey has serious know-how in the area. Russia has serious diplomatic weight. Everyone wants to move to a political solution. And if America tries to play spoiler for a political solution, they're going to lose in the international arena, because even the EU wants to move towards a political solution. And I don't think America has the sway over the EU that you think they have. They might have had it maybe pre-Trump, but they've lost that over the last year and a half.
Joshua Landis?
Well, I want to come back to another thing that was said here, which is that Assad's not at the table. I think that's really underestimating the power of this Syrian regime, because he's not at the table in Sochi, which is absolutely right. But that's because the Russians are offering a fig leaf to the West, which doesn't want to deal with Assad. But Assad is there. Almost 200,000 of his soldiers and people relating to his military effort have been killed in this adventure. And he's taking back Syria slowly. He's going to own it. Russia cannot, and neither can Iran, deal with Syria without him, because he holds it together, and he's been very careful to do that. He said that from the beginning. Without me, the place crumbles. He has created a situation in Syria where he's the only man that can rule it. And that's the terrifying thing, both for the opposition and for, but it's largely true. And that means that Russia has to take him into consideration, and America has to take him into consideration, because he's going to be there when other people go home. And he's going to hang out, and he's going to wait, and he's going to wait to take Idlib, and he's going to he's planning on pushing up north when the Americans get exhausted. And just what you're talking about, which is that this coalition is going to not want America there, creating an independent Kurdish country in the north. And they're going to put pressure. They're going to ratchet up the pressure. And eventually some American president's going to come along and say, why are we doing this? This is stupid. And Assad's going to be the beneficiary of that. And so I wouldn't count out Assad just because he's not at the table in Sochi, because he's sitting in the middle of Syria and he's got an army that's winning.
And that'll be the final word for now. So much more to talk about. I want to thank you, Josh Valandis, for joining us from Oklahoma City. I want to thank Yusuf Irim for being with us from Istanbul, Yahya Al-Abdullah, General Dominique Trinquant. And thank you for joining us here